Hello there, my name's Tim Walter. I'm a house healer and an alternative life coach. I help people work with the subtle energies of where they live. I do that by using mindful meditation, dowsing, and the power of focused intent. In other words, I look at life from a spiritual perspective. Now, I use dowsing in this spiritual work because it's a very practical and relatively easy tool to master as a way of actually getting information from these subtle areas of the dimensions in which we live, the areas that we don't necessarily always access on a day-to-day basis. Now, of course, dowsing is itself quite a contentious practice. A lot of people dismiss it because it doesn't give, or it doesn't seem to give, repeatable, concrete evidence time and time again. Now, just like any other aspect of life, there's all sorts of different ways to dowse and different ways to interpret information. And with the spiritual work, then I can assure you, there are definitely links to be made in the realms, in the dimensions that are just next to ours. Whether or not dowsing is the way that you want to try it out, that's actually up to you. And the purpose of all of these videos that I make is to allow you to make your own choices and to make your own decisions about how you want to follow. Maybe you could call it a spiritual path or just a different way of seeing the world. Science has grown up on the basis of looking at the world objectively, trying to evaluate an objective conclusion about reality. The problem with that is that actually the more and more science has learned about the quantum aspects of existence, the quantum theories, the way that reality is constructed, which now actually give very solid theories as to what is going on between us and the seemingly external environment, the more science is realizing that actually it's not a separate thing out there and in here. That actually is a resonant harmonic vibration created and projected by what goes on inside us. We are, in this sense, both a transmitter and a receiver at the quantum level. Now, the mechanics of how that information is interpreted and the reality that we each individually experience is constructed, that is very much open to question. But what we find when we start to examine the quantum realm and the experiences that we can have subjectively as a spiritual practice, such as dowsing, a way of interpreting and accessing that information, the more we see there are similarities between what is expected to be found within the quantum realms and our experiences that we can have. So, there are all sorts of ways of examining scientifically the objective reality of the dowser. Let's just look at one of those. The one I want to look at is known as the Munich barn experiment. In the 1980s, there was a group of scientists at a university in Munich who decided to conduct a rigorous and scientifically orientated experiment to see whether dowsing actually worked. Could they, through using the scientific method, actually prove one way or the other that yes, dowsing works, or no, it doesn't? What they did was they went to a barn, probably nothing like this one at all behind me, but it was a two-story barn. On the ground floor, they laid out a whole series of pipes that could be fed with water, and the positions of the pipes could be changed. There was 10 meters of pipe work that could be changed. On the floor above, they had a whole group of volunteers that had dowsing rods, pendulums, and they were tasked 10 times each to find the particular pipe that had the water flowing in it on the ground beneath them. Could they do it or could they not? The whole experiment was based upon this principle of, is it going to work? Is it not going to work? What are the statistical odds? Are they going to be better than chance? And the results were no, no. Overall, broadly speaking, the odds were level with chance. How disappointing is that? Not at all. I'm not at all disappointed by that. And actually, what's really interesting about it is some aspects of the results which applied to a particular gentleman by the name of Hans Schroeter. Now, Hans Schroeter was an experienced dowser. He was also an engineer, so he had a very precise and accurate and logical way of thinking and seeing the world. But equally, he was fully open-minded and prepared to accept that even though he didn't know how it worked, his dowsing worked. He had belief in what he did. So, what's going on there? The results of the Munich barn experiment have been used both by cynics to prove that dowsing doesn't work, and by dowsers like me to prove, yeah, it does. Why is that? Over all of the participants that took part, some of them were complete novices, and some were experienced dowsers. Those that were more experienced had greater success rate. What this seems to suggest is actually that, yes, if you pick up rods and you're new to it, odds are you're going to just hit chance, whatever it is you're looking for. But like any creative endeavour, the more you practice, the more you understand what you're doing, the more you gather skill, then the greater your accuracy in finding the results. So overall, the Munich barn experiment was inconclusive, but it's a fantastic example of how the subjective experience, not objective, the subjective experience of reality is so important to our well-being. I find the Munich barn experiment results particularly interesting. It's kind of what we would expect, really, as dowsers. But what it seems to indicate, and perhaps it doesn't do this with scientific, rigorous accuracy, but what it seems to suggest is that actually you can learn to become more and more accurate with your dowsing. This is exactly what my experience of working with a lot of people over these years has also shown, that nearly everybody, I've only met one person ever that felt as though they couldn't dowse. It's about practice, practice, practice in order to get accurate, to get better, and to get more confident with your own abilities, and to actually start to see the world differently. This is the key thing, and this is why I'm talking about this experimentation today, because really, a rigorously scientific, objective evaluation of dowsing is not actually what dowsing is about. Dowsing is a creative process. It's just like painting, like writing. It's like any creative process that is subjective. It is an emotional-based system. Now, having said that, a lot of people will say, no, it's not. It's logical. It's logical. It's either a yes or a no answer, but you're using your intuition. But it's still a logical question and answer process. And yes, it is a logical question and answer process. But like painting, you can paint in very many different ways. And with dowsing, you can dowse in very many different ways. And I tend to be quite woolly and fluffy, as several of you will know who have asked me to find missing people or missing pets. My success rate at that sort of dowsing is not very good. What I use it for is working as a key to access information, access personalities, access place that can give us information and that we can work with when we're working in a well-being situation as house healers. And what that's about is working with the subtle energies, the influences, the nuances, the intuition of reality. what does it mean to be a human being? And this is why experiments looking into dowsing are never going to find a completely uncontestable result. We need to look at the bigger picture. We always need to look at that bigger picture. So, more and more of us, of course, are accepting this whole principle about creating reality, and that's what we're sharing with each other in so many different ways. Those that go with the mainstream and aren't interested in asking the questions about what is the nature of reality, why do we experience things like we do, and simply get tied up in the mainstream fodder that we're fed to keep us in a state of tension and stress. Whether that's intentional or not is debatable, but that is what it does, and that is what is happening. And why is that? That's a whole different video. Let's go there some other day. Those that are content to simply live in that way are now finding that actually their paradigm, their description of the world that they have never given any thought to before is very much being upended. These are the people that are having trouble, are getting very stressed, are being extremely unwell through their inability to change. Because what we're seeing, as far as I can tell, is a complete shift of emphasis where we are increasingly together, collectively learning the power of our own inner universe. Now this is a very, very significant shift. Now, some of you, most of you perhaps that are watching this go, well, duh, we know that. But some of you won't yet have cottoned on to that. Some of you will have been dowsing for a little while, or you've heard about this thing called dowsing. You actually now have the chance to step right into shifting your awareness and changing so many things in your life, which actually is incredibly exciting. It's incredibly scary at the same time. But for those of us that have already made a lot of changes and taken some quite big chances and risked a lot of things in our development, shall we say, you realize that things are never quite as awful as they may seem. It's ironic that it's modern science that is actually pushing and driving a lot of the change that we're experiencing. There are some very solid scientific theories that are really emphasizing this sort of spiritual approach, this spiritual attitude to reality and the creation of reality and our role in it. There's panpsychism that is rapidly gaining ground. That is the belief that perhaps absolutely everything has a certain level of awareness. Cosmology is finding that, well, perhaps the cosmos itself is sentient, rather like a quantum brain. So whose brain are we living in? There are neuroscientists like Donald Hoffman developing theories very much based upon the holographic principle, the fact that we project our experience of being alive from the resonant vibrations that exist within us. And as we heal, the world outside changes, it develops, it becomes more peaceful, if that is what we search and seek. And this is not even to mention things like the many worlds theory. Now, Amit Goswami, who I have interviewed a few times on the channel, he's not a great proponent of the many worlds theory. He thinks that one world is quite enough. I don't agree with that. I think, and what my guides led me to understand, which I kind of adopt as a philosophy more than a practical reality of life, that we do literally live within our own universes, and we experience a uniqueness which we can't even fathom. And what we are in that instance is both the story of our lives and the storyteller of our lives. Because at the root of all of this, everything, is the infinite field of creative potential, the field of infinite possibilities, of which we are a part. And in that sense, we very much are the story as we experience life, symbolically created from within, and the storyteller, that device that is capable of creating and expressing itself in such a way. Now, for some decades, the idea that we are both transmitters and receivers has been bandied around and used in science, and what we transmit is our inner vibration. What we receive is what the universe, the management, the other aspects of being want to give to us to experience and create with. The reason it's so important is because it's purely subjective. And therefore, an experiment like the Munich barn experiment can never hope to get to the bottom of what that simple act of dowsing is doing when it is connecting through the quantum field to find and search and locate H2O. And so why is this concept of being both the storyteller and the story, the transmitter and the receiver, so very important? Well, if you think back to the Munich barn experiment, what we said was an experienced dowser has improved results, has more accurate results, can more often find the water that they are looking for. When we understand and we appreciate and we buy into this idea that we are both the transmitter and the receiver, the story and the storyteller, then we start to connect to the universe in a different way. We start to understand our role in what is going on, and we can see the symbolism in what is going on around us. It gives us detachment, it gives us power in that detachment, and it gives us choices that are far more wide-ranging from the infinite possibility, the field of creative infinite possibility. It gives us a greater choice to choose from, because we are choosing mindfully. The implications of really using a practical, simple practical tool, such a simple practical tool to open the door on such an expansive and amazing opportunity. And that's why I'm sharing it with you. That's why I do this stuff, because it's amazing. It is simply amazing. And that is where the magic lies, within that spark, that moment when we choose in the knowledge of what we are, and we accept what we are, and we operate from a basis where we know that the universe accepts who we are. And that means working from your heart and connecting and accepting and forgiving and simply being. And that, I think, is worth experimenting on.